Good morning. Welcome back to Bible Study. It's 9 o'clock, so let's jump back in. We're in Nehemiah chapters 6 and 7 today, in the middle of building this wall. Last time, the trouble that he ran into, where everyone's excited at the get-go, everyone jumps in and helps, and then they get halfway done, and everyone says, we're tired of this. This is hard work. There's more rubble than we really expected was going to be here. And you've got these enemies from outside of Judea saying, we're going to raise an army and attack. And when that fails, then it's, well, we've got people on the inside and we can attack you before you could even respond. And so Nehemiah is having to do security of like, how could we fend off an army attacking? Or how could we prevent a terrorist attack where there's someone who would just attack the workers at one point on the wall? And then on top of that, all of a sudden you've got people coming forward and saying, we don't have food to eat. And this isn't fair because we've got rich people, and it's not these are foreigners, it's fellow Jews where we had to mortgage our farm to them and our house to them. We're on the border of actually selling ourselves as slaves to our fellow Jews just so we can have food to eat. And so then Nehemiah has to work through how do you handle social justice and making sure that there's fair treatment of everybody and you don't have people who are poor at the expense of others. So then he made all the people, the richer people, take an oath in front of the priest that they were going to give back the property and stop charging interest. They would still lend and expect a repayment, but they were going to stop charging interest to the people who are poor. So that's where we left it last time. The wall still is not built, and we've got a couple chapters left. Today the wall will get finished. So let's begin with a prayer this morning. Lord God, I pray today that you'd be with us and bless us as we study your word. Help us to first of all understand what you did in the lives of your people back then, and then to be able to look at ourselves and say, here's how you're at work in our lives too. So please bless our Bible study this morning. Amen. Nehemiah chapter 6. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message, come let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. I hear Ono, I think like there was an Apollo Ono figure skater, speed skater. Or like music and stuff, like where's Ono? Here's a map of, I forgot to show you this. So we're here today. Next week we still have class before spring break. But here's a map of what people say it probably looked like for the borders. I don't know how precise this is, going back that far in time if they know exactly where the borders were. But Judah, or Yehud, I think is how the Persians would have called it, is that purple area in the middle, which is a lot smaller than the kingdom at the time of like David. So if I zoom in on that purple area, north of there is Samaria. That's similar to the New Testament. There's an area of Samaria where Jesus has to walk through there, north of Judea. That's where Sanballat is from. So when you hear his name, think of the guy in that green area to the north. To the east, that orange area is Ammon, and that's where the Tobiads have a dynasty, and they're the ones ruling. So we've got Tobiah is going to be in a lot of these stories, and then Geshem the Arab would have been maybe in that green area or the yellow areas down to the south or the east. To the west, Ashdod would have been where the Philistines used to live, and there's another blue area north on the coast. So the Jews are surrounded on all sides by all these other little groups of people. And Sanballat and Tobiah, for sure, are opposing the work. So if you say, where's Ono? Kind of way on the fringe of the territory of Judea, right on the border with Samaria and some of these other places. So maybe they could say, well, this is kind of a neutral area because it's at a border. Nehemiah, though, senses that this is a trap. So going back to Nehemiah chapter 6, it's not quite done yet. you can still get through the gates without getting stopped, but the walls have been fixed. There are no more gaps. And at that point, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply: "I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Throughout the whole book of Nehemiah, you see here's a man who understands just how to navigate some tough leadership things. So the request is, hey, let's get together for a meeting in the village at the plain of Ono. What's Nehemiah reading into that? They want to harm him. What could you imagine could happen to Nehemiah if he goes to this meeting?
Disappear.
It could be that he gets kidnapped and he disappears. I don't know what happened to him. He never showed up. Maybe they would have just outright assassinated him. Maybe they would have taken him captive or something, and I don't know what they would have, something that they would have held him as leverage against completing the walls. So they didn't say that, and I guess, I don't know that we know for sure exactly what they were planning, but Nehemiah's gut tells him, don't go to Ono. That's not a good idea. They're going to hurt you there. So, what does he say in response?
Got a project going on.
I'd love to join you, but
Stay here.
I'm too busy right now.
Yes, but no.
So just this, and even today, how, isn't that probably the top excuse people give for things is, I'm too busy, is a polite way of saying no. And it's always hard to read below the surface of, is that because the person really just honestly is too busy, or is it because they don't really want to do it, and that's just a convenient excuse for everybody?
Well, it's true because he had a pretty big project going on.
It's true.
He's going to set the doors and the gates.
And he assumes they're going to hurt him, but even if they hadn't hurt him, is it worth Nehemiah's time to spend, this is probably a couple of days to walk up there. They could draw out this meeting for I don't know how long. A couple of days to walk back. Is this worth a week of Nehemiah's life? Even that side of it. So Nehemiah can honestly say, I've got this big project going on. I'm too busy. Can't join you. They wait a little bit, and what do they say then?
4 times.
How about now? Do you have time now? And what does he say to them? Oh, I'm too busy. I'm still building the wall. They come back a 3rd time. I want to come join us at the plain of Ono? I'm still too busy. 4th time. Professor Brooks' commentary says it sounds like they're pretty desperate. 4th time. Well, has your calendar cleared up yet? You got an opening for us next week? And the answer is, nope, I'm still too busy. I'm building this wall. I can't meet you there. And so just the way that Nehemiah is trying to navigate stuff, this one, it's just to ignore or push off the request. Sorry, too busy. I can't go and meet with you. Then they realize if they ask him 10 times, he's just going to keep saying, I'm busy. So then they switch to a different letter the 5th time. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written this. Now, I think it matters this is an unsealed letter. Why add that detail, and what would that mean?
Other people could read it.
So usually, back then, you've got either a clay or a wax seal you put on it, and then you stamp your personal seal into it. And then if you would open the letter, there'd no way to close that and reseal it again. So that'd be a way of showing that if correspondence arrived, this was for your eyes only and no one else had seen it. So it's not by coincidence that the letter that's sent doesn't have a seal on it. So I think you had it. What does it mean if it's unsealed?
That other people were able to read it.
Anybody along the way who bumped into this messenger could have read this letter, and the messenger could have read the letter, and so this is purposely spreading gossip now. So here's what's in the open letter from Sanballat. It's reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together. What do you make of that?
Big revolt.
This is not something to be unthinkable. There are plenty of revolts that happen like this. The Persians are trying to hold together an empire of a lot of other peoples who used to be independent and don't always want to be part of some huge empire. So Geshem says this is true. I don't know, but I'm just passing along what I heard from him, is that you're going to start a revolt and be the king, and you've got people who are going to proclaim that in Jerusalem. Let's meet together. Otherwise, there's a threat there, right? What's the threat?
The king's going to find out.
I am going to pass this message out. Already, he's sending this in an unsealed letter. If you don't meet with me, if you say you're too busy, now I'm threatening that I am going to start spreading this rumor about you that you are planning to revolt against the Persian Empire. So just the different kind of pressures that are on Nehemiah. You've got like actual army war pressure. You've got social unrest with the people being poor. You've got now this kind of diplomatic threats. So how do you respond to Nehemiah to that one? I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. So it's not just that he sends that reply. What does Nehemiah figure is going on reading between the lines? He knows that what they're really going for is if they can scare Nehemiah and scare the people, using fear as the way to stop the wall from being completed.
He should have said that the letter wasn't sealed, so it was fake news.
Fake news.
It's a scam.
What you're saying isn't true, you're just making that up. And whether he took other action doesn't say that he did here. It sounds like he didn't try to say to anybody else this is a rumor. He just assumed that everyone would be able to recognize this, that this is propaganda made up as a lie to try to stop the work.
Who was Gresham again?
Geshem's the Arab. So you've got Sanballat in the north, Tobiah is in the east, Geshem is in the south, and kind of the three of them are together against Nehemiah. And then throughout Nehemiah, you just get the sense that Nehemiah is constantly praying to God in his heart as he goes about his life. That last sentence is kind of unclear. It must be a prayer. That as Nehemiah is doing this, what does he ask for? Strengthen my hands. The danger is that Nehemiah would lose the strength and the motivation and the drive to finish this project. And so as he faces all this opposition, he's praying to God, God, please strengthen my hands today. Other prayers he prayed, God, I'm doing this for you. Remember me in the end and what I've been doing for your people. He prayed that God would let him find favor in the eyes of the right people to allow the work to keep going. Prayed that God would have mercy on his people, forgive their sins. Just the little things Nehemiah is praying for. Kind of every single chapter there's something where you see what's in his prayer life. Next one, verse 10. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Deliah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut in at his home. He said, "Let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you."
What does it mean, who was shut in at his home?
People wonder that. Like, why couldn't he leave his home? Can you think of any reasons why a guy would not be able to leave his home?
Maybe he couldn't walk.
Maybe he's somehow an invalid and can't get out.
Or is he being punished?
It doesn't sound like he's under house arrest, because he could go to the temple with Nehemiah if Nehemiah agrees to it.
Maybe he's hiding.
So one would be maybe he is trying to protect himself, that he's scared someone's trying to hurt him, and so he's refusing to go out himself. Another option is that if he somehow was unclean, spiritually he'd have to kind of withdraw until he was purified and able to be clean again. So it doesn't say why he was shut in his house, but it sounds like Nehemiah has to go to his house. It sounds like he'd been told, "I've got a message or something I want to tell you." So Nehemiah goes to this guy's house. I don't know, if it's me, I'm kind of wondering, what am I going to hear here? What am I going to have to react to? What is it that he hears at this guy's house?
This guy was shut in. How would he get the message?
He probably sent somebody else to Nehemiah to say, "Nehemiah, Shemaiah wants you to come to his house. He's got something."
But how would Shemaiah get the message if
Which-
he'd been shut in? If he was unable to go out?
How did he get the message?
How did he-
Here, we're reading between the lines. My guess is that Shemaiah is in contact with other people. So they're people who are probably bringing him food and talking to him. So he has ways of communicating with people outside his house, even though he's not leaving his house at the moment. So somehow he gets a message to Nehemiah. Nehemiah goes to his house, not sure what to expect there. What does Shemaiah tell Nehemiah? "I know that there's somebody coming to kill you. When are they coming? In the middle of the night, someone's going to come and murder you. And so my advice for you, Nehemiah, is I'll come with you. You need to shut yourself in the temple so that you'll be safe." Now, where in the temple would have gone and how that would have worked? The temple was a place to seek refuge if you thought your life was in danger. The trouble is that Nehemiah is your layman when it comes to worship. He's not a priest. And so he's restricted from going into the temple. He could have worshiped in the temple courts, but when you seek asylum at the temple, you're going beyond the border of where you're allowed to go. So Shemaiah's advice is, I can get you into the temple. People also wonder, what kind of security clearance does he have or access to the temple that he can get Nehemiah into an area where otherwise Nehemiah couldn't have gone? So he says, I can get you into the temple. You need to go shut yourself in there because someone's going to kill you at night. How do you react to that one if you're Nehemiah?
Is it another lie? Yeah, you don't trust him.
But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. Now, I'm assuming here that Nehemiah pieces things together correctly. You're hearing, here's what Nehemiah, how he assessed the situation. that's the kind of stuff he probably wasn't told out loud, but how does Nehemiah read between the lines there? What does he figure is going on? He figures it's a setup.
What makes him think it's a setup, though, I wonder?
He's thinking through what's going to happen if he does it. So what if he goes into the temple with Shemaiah to save his life? First of all, it would be a sign of fear. And Nehemiah realizes that the main thing that Tobiah and Sanballat are trying to do is to intimidate him and the people and make them all afraid. And if Nehemiah, the leader, shows some huge act of fear, that's going to make everybody else afraid too. So even if this threat was real, Nehemiah says, I don't know that running away to save my life, even if the threat was real, would be the right action, because that'd be an act showing fear. But Nehemiah says, I don't think there's really a threat. What does he figure is going on with Shemaiah?
He was hired by Tobiah and Sanballat.
He figures that he's being paid off by them to send this message, because if Nehemiah would take refuge in the temple, how would that have been perceived socially among the Jews?
Sinful.
That this would have been sinful for him to go into the temple when he wasn't a priest, especially if it came out later that his life really wasn't in danger. And if Nehemiah would do that public mistake, even publicly sin, what are they going to do to him after that? They're going to use this as a way to destroy his reputation and try to destroy his ability to lead the people.
Which he says, should a man like me run away? So he had respect.
When is it that as a leader you just need to face whatever it is and not run? And that's a tricky one too, to try to avoid some kind of scandal where, in this case, it's Nehemiah figures there are other people trying to purposely entrap him in something that would make him look bad. And then they're going to blast this all over the front page of the paper. And it's going to be on all the social media feeds, and everybody, the one thing that they're going to know about Nehemiah is, did you hear how Nehemiah went to the temple when it was wrong, and he was afraid, and how this could have destroyed his ability to lead the people.
It would show a lack of trust in God, too.
Yep, lack of trust in God, fear, all of that would have been part of it. So this is where, for me, if I was told somebody's going to kill you tonight, I'm going to help keep you safe. Here Nehemiah is having to work through who are his true friends and who are his false friends. And the opposition, some of the hardest parts, is not stuff coming from outside the city of Jerusalem. It's that there are people within Jerusalem who are working against him. So this is one where Nehemiah senses that it would be wrong for him to do this. So again, he just brushes this one off and says no. Another prayer. So it kind of goes back and forth. Every single event in Nehemiah's life, he is reflecting this back to God and asking things from him. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. What's his prayer this time?
For the enemy.
It's very similar to the prayer that we looked at last week, the week before. It's a prayer about these people who are opposing him. And what's his prayer? God, you remember them. I am giving this to you. You're going to be able to sort out God better than I can. What was right and what was wrong. what each person deserves as what's just. So is Nehemiah going to take revenge against them? No. Is he saying this is all fine what they've been doing to him? Nope. But he takes us to God in prayer and says, God, I want you to remember Sanballat and Tobiah. And not just them. Who else is on his list of God, I'm putting it in your hands to deal with these people? Some of the prophets in Jerusalem, including a woman. Does that surprise you? If you make a list, she's one of 5 women in the Old Testament who's labeled a prophetess. A couple of them, it seems like it might have been that they were connected to a prophet, and whether they received messages from God or not, we're not sure. So like Miriam is a prophetess. She sang some songs, and she was at the time of Moses. Isaiah's wife is called a prophetess. We don't know if that's just because she was married to Isaiah, or if she also was used by God with messages. Deborah, at the time of the judges, there was such a leadership vacuum then that Deborah stepped in and helped to lead the people then. There's a prophetess named Huldah at the time of Jeremiah, just before the exile. In this case, the question is whether she's a true prophet at all from God, because in this case, Nehemiah says that he knows she was bringing messages that weren't really from God. This had been a huge issue before the exile. You read the book of Jeremiah, and there are a lot of people who claim to be prophets, but they were telling the king what the king wanted to hear, or what the people wanted to hear, and they weren't actually speaking for God. So Nehemiah is facing that there are prophets in Jerusalem who are prophesying against him and against the wall while he's trying to rebuild it. And he puts that all in God's hands. God, I'm giving it to you to remember them. What's amazing is how quickly it gets done, too. How long did it take them to repair the wall? A little less than 2 months. If you put that date in the calendar, it's early October when they finish, which means they would have started in August. So an August to October building project. Even for us building the early learning center, that's like 10 months, and that's moving pretty quickly. This was an all hands on deck. And I'm guessing Nehemiah was pretty exhausted at the end of those 52 days from trying to organize the work and all the complaints of the people and trying to fend off an attack and assassination plots and all this diplomatic stuff going on. And you got prophets prophesying against him in Jerusalem. The amount of pressure that's all on him. And he prays, God, keep strengthening my hands. God, you please remember those who are against me. Give me the strength and the abilities to keep going with the work. With the 52 days, it does sound like it was as quick as possible. It probably wasn't the highest quality work. And they probably were repairing rather than just building from scratch. But still, that is just a sign of God's blessing and using Nehemiah as a leader, that Nehemiah is able to leave Babylon, show up, and within 6 months of leaving, he's able to have a wall rebuilt. Any other questions you've got or comments on this chapter?
Did he get a 6th invite then since the wall was done?
Goes to party,
Yeah.
go here and see them.
Yeah, come on over.
Come down to our ribbon cutting ceremony?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I missed a couple of the meetings, so was he called to do that, or did he take it upon himself to go down?
So Nehemiah had been the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. He got a message. There were people visiting. The question is, there's a guy called his brother, and the question is whether that's his biological brother or brother in the fellow countryman kind of sense. But he comes, and it sounds like maybe he was on other business or what reason he was there, but he comes bringing news from Judea, and part of the news is that the walls have been destroyed. And this really hits Nehemiah hard, living over, I said Babylon before, but I think he's in Susa. Wasn't he in Susa? So Nehemiah, it takes like 3 months of him thinking and praying about it before he goes to King Artaxerxes. And so we don't know that God specifically came to him with a revelation and said, "You're doing this." But Nehemiah was convinced that this is what he needed to do to serve God's people. And he was convinced that God was going to be with him and bless him. So, to your question, did he have a direct calling to do this? Not that there's a verse that says God came to him and said this, but the whole book of Nehemiah shows very clearly that God is using him, and this is not just him doing something on his own. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Just how quickly it went and that they were able to finish it. And I think it's interesting how they were trying to make Nehemiah afraid, and now it actually goes in reverse. Everyone else is standing in fear and awe of what God has accomplished through these people in Jerusalem. I think this next paragraph is really interesting too, just thinking through the diplomacy of that time and how all this is working. Also, in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Arah, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and then telling him what I said, and Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. That's quite the web of stuff going on. So kind of unpack that. What is all going on with communication in these couple of months? Remember, Tobiah is one of them who's against the rebuilding of the wall.
The nobles are the rich people, correct?
Yep. And whose side are the nobles on? Tobiah's side. So if you thought that Nehemiah shows up and all the people of Jerusalem are behind Nehemiah, the reality is there are some very influential people who actually have some pretty close connections to Tobiah. Why is that?
The intermarriage or whatever.
Remember in Ezra, how Ezra addressed the intermarriage? That would have been before the time of Nehemiah, but that's not the kind of thing that just goes away overnight. And some of those connections still were in force. So, how do they put it? That they're under oath to him? So his wife was the daughter of a Jewish family. And then when they had a son, his son married a girl from among the Jews. So both his generation, the next generation, have some very close family ties to other noble families from the Jews. Even the name he gives his son is a very Jewish name. So when Ezra is confronting the intermarriage that we talked about at the end of Ezra, a big part of that was the religious side of it, about bringing things in where we're not worshiping God and believing in him like we did in the past. But part of it would be political like this, where all of a sudden Tobiah is pulling strings in Jerusalem because of all the family connections he has. Verse 19, what does this communication usually look like?
Sending them mean letters.
Who's sending mean letters?
Yeah. He's just.
When Tobiah writes to Nehemiah personally, Those letters are not nice.
Not nice.
When the nobles talk to Nehemiah about Tobiah, what do they say?
Yeah. It's just,
He's a great guy. We like him. Let me tell you all the great stuff that Tobiah does. So Nehemiah is getting both sides of this, where these influential people in Jerusalem are saying, Tobiah's a great guy. I know him. I'm married to his daughter or whatever. So he's getting that message from them. From Tobiah, he's getting these really mean letters. And then what does he know is going on behind the scenes, going back to Tobiah? Tobiah is getting an inside account of not just what's going on in Jerusalem, but what do they tell Tobiah? Whatever Nehemiah says. So if they say Tobiah's a great guy and they're having a conversation about Tobiah, Tobiah is going to hear what Nehemiah says about Tobiah to somebody else in Jerusalem. So all of this is going on behind the scenes for Nehemiah as he's trying to build the wall with these other area leaders on the surface playing nice, but behind the scenes hating Nehemiah's guts. Tim?
I would say that ties in with, there's sneaks, there's spies all over. Whatever he's doing, it gets back to them faster than the other Jewish
And
people.
how much is this him being sneaky or underhanded, or how much is this part of being a leader? And how diplomacy and politics works is you want to have information coming to you. You want to have people who are telling what's going on. You want to build those kind of personal connections and relationships. So whether Tobiah is doing something different than any other leader would have done back then, or even today, I think, for someone who is very powerful in politics, it still is knowing the right people who can tell you what's going on and having people who can pull strings for you in all kinds of different places. And so Nehemiah walks in from, they don't know him 6 months ago. He walks in, he's leading this big project. The people in Jerusalem have some longer term connections actually with the people who are against Nehemiah. Let's keep going, chapter 7. After the wall had been rebuilt, and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, musicians, and Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. Walls are done. What's the very next course of action for Nehemiah? Doors are there.
Put his brother in charge.
Somebody's got to be in charge, and in charge of what?
Commander of the citadel, is that the army?
Citadel would have been kind of the area that was reinforced the best. So these are two men who are in charge of security for Jerusalem. And you think they haven't had functioning walls since coming back from captivity. This wouldn't have been part of their process or workflow for Jerusalem. So now that they have walls and gates, they need to get in the habit of actually using them and securing them. And that means some changes for everybody that I'm guessing not everybody appreciated. So what's on the list of things that Nehemiah is going to do?
Well, first of all, you can't come and go when you want to. They're going to close it down and they're going to open it up, so you got a very specific time that you can come in and out.
There are going to be times of day when you can come in and out of Jerusalem. And I just knowing how people work, I'm guessing that that was not convenient for people who are used to coming and going through the gaps in the wall whenever they felt like it. When's Nehemiah's time for when you can come in?
Sun's hot.
When the sun is hot. Not the first crack of dawn. It's going to be after the sun is up that we open up Jerusalem and people can come and go. And I think, did it say they've got to close it up kind of while there are people still on duty? So it's not you're going to be getting out of the city at 11 o'clock at night after your late night party. There's going to be a time in the morning and then a time before everybody's off duty when the gates are opened and closed. And also, it's going to take quite a bit of people to now there are jobs where you've got people who are guarding the gates. So having a wall and gates is not just you build it and it's done. It would have been something they had to staff and then run continually afterwards. Who's he picked to be in charge of this?
His brother.
That's the same guy mentioned in that opening chapter who came and talked to him and told him about the problem. Again, the question is this his biological brother? Or is it some other connection using that word? There's another man, a similar name, Hananiah. And what's the two characteristics that Nehemiah says, here's where I pick this guy?
Integrity.
He's got integrity,
Feared God
and he feared God how much?
more than most.
I think that's a great line. More than most people do. That there are some people where they do fear God, but not always that deeply. Here's a man who seems to have a deep trust in God and care for God. Here's a man who's
How does he know that? Because he must be verbal about it.
verbal about it, or just Nehemiah has a sense of who is it that he can trust, who has integrity, who is it where their faith in God runs deep.
It must have been evident that he felt that way.
And so for this kind of important job, he says, a man where he can be trusted, and a man who has faith in God.
Kind of a good example that is evident to that point.
And still today, trying to find who are the people who have the gifts for the work. Nehemiah says, here are two men, and they're in charge of keeping all that going. Also, this is stuff at the temple. They don't need musicians to guard the outside gates. But it sounds like Ezra had been hoping to do more with the temple when he came back. That's also on Nehemiah's mind, is to have more people scheduled for working at the temple too. That thing with the gates being open or not, that's going to come back later in Nehemiah, where even like, when do you open them on the Sabbath? Because the Sabbath is a day of rest. The trouble later in the book is the merchants want to be having the gates open all the time so they can be selling stuff even on the Sabbath. And so Nehemiah is going to use the gates to regulate life in Jerusalem, that there are times when he's going to make sure the gates are shut, because when the gates are shut, that kind of settles everything down and there's not much activity going on in Jerusalem if people can't come and go.
Isn't he kind of acting like a king? I mean, they said, they feared that he was going to try to be king, but, he's got all these rules and telling everybody what they can do.
My first reaction, you're talking like an American, where the word king is a bad word for us. In the Old Testament times, is a king a bad thing? I think what you're getting at is he taking on more power than he'd been given?
Right.
What's your sense of what we've read in the book so far, or what his mandate was from King Artaxerxes?
And just the fact that he's manning the gates when they're open or closed, I mean, people have things to do, I guess that's the part that would kind of bother me.
If you go back to chapter 1, King Artaxerxes actually gave him a written letter with what his charge was and his responsibilities were. My personal sense is that Nehemiah is not going outside of that and taking more on himself than he was entrusted with. You also never hear that Nehemiah was competing with somebody else who already was in this role. it sounds like Jerusalem was missing a kind of central leader. And just the way that they would have operated back then, it wouldn't have been taking opinion poll of when you want the gates open. I bet that Sanballat and Tobiah, they also are not running a democracy where they're at, where people are voting on when they want to have the gates open. There would have been central leadership and often one person who's been charged with being the head. And so, yeah, Nehemiah is stepping in not just for the project, but he's now going to be the governor of Judea for about 12 years. And this kind of stuff would have been, I think, very much within his area of responsibility. Not that that probably made the people happy all the time. I bet there would have been people where it was inconvenient, when they were used to not having walls. Just like in the chapter before, he took a lot of effort to have them even take an oath about giving the property back. Professor Brugge made a comment that when people are writing back and forth to Tobiah, if these are the richer people or the leading families, some of them may very well have been griping about how they had to give up some of their finances in that reform that tried to help the poor people. So Nehemiah is going to have to navigate all those different social levels and interactions as he's the governor now of Judea.
Was much of the population in behind the walls?
Did you read ahead?
No.
Because that's the next thing.
Okay.
The answer is no. So also, if you'd say, how far-reaching is Nehemiah's power? He's going to push to have people relocate to Jerusalem, even if they don't want to. Because actually, it's been more desirable to live outside Jerusalem so far, and his goal is going to be to have 10% of the population relocate back into Jerusalem. And he's going to have the authority as governor to carry that out. Again, not forcing that on people who don't want that either, but that probably would have been the kind of thing where there would have been people for and against it, and he's going to say, we need to go ahead and repopulate Jerusalem. Keep going to that. That's what's next. Now, the city was large and spacious, but there were a few people in it. Just what Ken was talking about. And the houses had not been rebuilt. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. And since you love hearing me read lists of names and numbers, we've got another one coming up. But before I read it, what's the background and what is Nehemiah looking for next? The wall's done. It's guarded and staffed. Their operating hours.
You have to populate the city.
We got to populate the city. And what's Nehemiah's overall plan for doing that? He found that list. That's what's coming up. He wants to take a new census now of who are all the people who live in Judea. So he's going to have a new census, and from that list, he's going to bring people in. But he wants it to connect back to the list of people who came back originally. And so he's doing some historical digging to find out what's the history of who's lived here as we have a new phase of moving people into Jerusalem. So what comes up is a list that's very similar to the list that's in Ezra. But it's not identical. And so here's where, let me read the list, and then you can tell me how much you want to talk through it. There are kind of two approaches when you have parts of the Bible that talk about the same thing. The other place in the Bible where this comes up is that we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are all accounts of Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, and Luke overlap a lot where they'll talk about the same events, but they don't always use identical words. So the two approaches you can have, one is to say, I think this is where we would fall, these are complementing accounts where just like you could have eyewitnesses giving a statement about like a car accident, and they would all describe it differently, but it would all be true about the same event. You have things in the Bible that they're all true, they're not competing or conflicting with each other, and our job then is to say, how do these fit together? The other approach is that when you have two accounts, to right away say, oh, there must be mistakes here. And if there's a difference between the two, it must be that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. I think that's the approach you'll find with people who are very skeptical that the Bible is God's Word. And so as you read a list like this, if you compare it back with what Ezra had, you're going to see there are a lot of things that are exactly the same. There are a bunch of things, and some of them surprising that you would have thought were the same, are actually different. And then to think through why that would be. So here's the list. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity, the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramamiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispereth, Bigvai, Nahum, and Baanah. The list of the men of Israel. Descendants of Parosh, 2,172. Shephatiah, 372. Of Ara, 352. Of Pahath Moab, through the line of Jeshua and Joab, 2,818. Of Elam, 1,254. Of Zatu, 845. Of Zaki, 760. Of Binui, 648. Of Bebai, 628. Of Asgad, 2,322. Of Adonikam, 667. Of Bigvai, 2,067. Of Aden, 655. Of Ater, through Hezekiah, 98. Of Hashum, 328. Of Bezai, 324. Of Harif, 112. Gibeon, 95. The men of Bethlehem and Netophah, 188. Anathoth, 128. Beth Abzameth, 42. Kiriath Jearim, Kephirah, Beeroth, 743. Ramah and Gebus, 621. Michmash, 122. Bethel and Ai, 123. The other Nebo, 52. The other Elam, 1,254. Harim, 320. Jericho, 345. Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 721. Se'anah, 3,930. The priests, the descendants of Jedaiah through the family of Jeshua, of Immer. Well, I guess priest is 973. Of Immer, 1,052. Of Pashur, 1,247. Of Harim, 1,017. The Levites, the descendants of Jeshua, through Kadmiel, through the line of Hodaviah, 74. The musicians, the descendants of Asaph, 148. The gatekeepers, the descendants of Shalom, Ater, Talman, Akub, Hatita, and Shobai, 138. The temple servants, the descendants of Ziha, Hasufa, Ta'both, Kerasia, Padan, Labana, Hagaba, Shalmai, Hanan, Gidel, Gahar, Ra'aya, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Paseah, Bezai, Meunim, Nefusim, Bakbuk, Hakufa, Harhur, Bazluth, Mahida, Harsha, Barka, Sisera, Tima, Neziah, and Hatiphah, the descendants of the servants of Solomon, the descendants of Sotai, Sophereth, Perida, Jaala, Darkan, Giddel, Shephatiah, Hatil, Pokereth, Hazabim, and Ammon, the temple servants, the descendants of the servants of Solomon, 392. The following came up from the towns of Tel Melah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Eden, and Immer, but they could not show that their families were descendants from Israel, the descendants of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, 642. And from among the priests, the descendants of Hobiah, Hakaz, and Barzillai, a man who had married a daughter of Barzillai the Gileadite and was called by that name. These searched for their family records, but they could not find them, and so were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor, therefore, ordered them not to eat any of the most sacred food until there should be a priest ministering with the Urim and Thummim. The whole company numbered 42,360. Besides their 7,337 male and female slaves, and they also had 245 male and female singers. There were 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. Some of the heads of the families contributed to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 derricks of gold, 50 bowls, and 530 garments for the priests. Some of the heads of the families gave to the treasury for the work 20,000 derricks of gold and 2,200 minas of silver. The total given by the rest of the people was 20,000 derricks of gold, 2,000 minas of silver, and 67 garments for the priests. The priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the temple servants, along with certain of the people and the rest of the Israelites, settled in their own towns. How much do you want to talk about that? We got 5 minutes. Is that good enough? What strikes you about the list? It's long. That they kept those kind of records. And that Nehemiah is finding this record now close to 100 years after they actually came back home. So somewhere they're keeping records like this in a place where Nehemiah can find them. Like I said before, what's interesting is how similar it is, but how different it is from the list in Ezra. So you say, how can that be? The thing that's the same is the total number of people is exactly the same number. If you add them up, though, they're different totals. Neither of them adds up to the total. So Professor Brug's comment is, he thinks the best answer is that there would have, each of these is a summary. Neither of them tries to be exact with everybody's name. And as long as the list is, there are people who must be missing because it doesn't add up to the total given. And they could do math well enough back then to have realized this list is not 100% complete. So it seems like they're working off of the same time period. Many of the names are identical, but there are some things where there must have been at least a couple different versions of the list where Nehemiah and Ezra must have pulled from different versions. There's also reason to say that it seems like maybe Ezra and Nehemiah were written by different people. Some people have thought that the same author authored both books. But it would seem strange that you would have somebody who is using different sources for the same document. So some of these are things, it doesn't say that in a verse of the Bible, but as you read between the lines, kind of how do you explain all of this? Other changes, like some of them, the name is similar but not identical. Like if someone was John or Johnny in English, they probably had different variations on the same name for these Hebrew names. It also is true that as God inspired the originals, as they've been handed down to us, sometimes they haven't been copied correctly. And there's some errors that have snuck in. And it's especially easy with numbers. So it could be that some of the discrepancies are, as these books of the Bible have been copied for the last couple thousand years, that some of the numbers might have had something that slipped in that was wrong over the copying. But the perspective I'm going to take, and I'm assuming it's kind of how we're all approaching it, is that one where Nehemiah and Ezra are giving us accounts that are describing the same thing, and they complement each other. And it's not like this is a place to say, the Bible's full of mistakes, because they've got differences in these two lists. Karen.
They had a big church band, 148 piece.
148 musicians. And some of this is, it sounds like they're living all around. So I don't know that, at the time of David, it sounds like there really was a lot going on at the Temple of Music. Sounds like Ezra and Nehemiah both want to make that happen again, but if nobody's living in Jerusalem, I doubt that they're having a 148-piece orchestra playing to nobody.
Not to mention singers.
Singers too, gatekeepers. The whole temple was, there were a lot of people who worked there.
Must have been impressive, all of it.
I know before when we were talking about that big list, and I think Tracy said something about why are they counting plates and stuff like that. You know, why would they keep track of the camels and donkeys? And it was just an inventory type of thing, or?
Yeah, why would they? I think with the gold and silver articles, part of that was probably to make sure that it all arrived safely. Who was it who had such a careful inventory of that? Was that Ezra? I think when Ezra came back, he talked about how careful he was to make sure that nothing disappeared along the way. So that might be part of it. Their animals were probably some of their most important possessions. This is just me, my take on it would be that to have a list of the number of camels they had probably didn't seem strange to them.
Well, wasn't that like a sign of wealth too? I mean, so that it goes right with the gold and silver.
And you average the animals out for that many people, and it's not like they are hugely wealthy. A guy like Job, he's got like as many animals as these 42,000 people. in a way, this is a spot where you can break the book of Nehemiah in half. Chapters 1 to 7 is rebuilding the wall. The rest of the book is going to be him. Again, he's not usurping power that wasn't his, but he is the governor. And so now he's going to have other things that he is working on as he leads the people. So we're going to get into that second half next time. Ezra's going to come back in. You actually hear about Ezra more in the book of Nehemiah than you do in the book that bears his name. So these are some really good chapters about just religiously a revival that Nehemiah and Ezra led. That'll be next time. And let me put the schedule up one more time. Not that one, this one. We're on 6 and 7 today. Come back next week again for chapters 8 and 9, and then we'll have 1 week off for spring break the week after that. Do I have that wrong? Is it the week after that?
I think so.
You, I think, are right, but I'm wrong. You're right, spring break is the 19th. So come back the next 2 weeks. Forget what I said there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Terry.
So what's the reading after Nehemiah 8, 9?
10.
Oh, it is. I didn't jump to another book.
Nehemiah has 13 chapters. So we'll have some more. We can just keep reading Nehemiah. Yep.
Could have been 10 and 11.
Yeah.
We'll go with 10 and 11. Let's close with a prayer this morning. Lord God, I pray today that you'd be with us just as you were with Nehemiah. The things he had to wrestle through, death threats and being intimidated and knowing who to trust and who not to. Thank you that you blessed him as he worked through that for himself, and pray that you'd give us wisdom too. First of all, when it comes to your word, to know what's true and false, what you say. But then just in life too, that you'd guide us with the kind of wisdom that knows how to love people and trust people and lead people, that you'd give us what we need to serve those around us too. I pray that all in Jesus' name. Amen.